It's okay. You have to change the view, Dr.
Yeah.
Ramos.
See the view.
The view is on speaker view.
Maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the setup is in your local time, local place.
Speaker, you can do gallery or multi-speaker.
Multi-speaker.
Yeah.
We can begin now. Fred,
Okay.
would you like, I will hand it over to Frederico to continue with the presentation, please.
I think you can start. It's 10 o'clock.
I think so.
Go ahead, Fred.
Frederico.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's start so. Okay. So here you're, yeah. Can you listen to me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And here in our international seminar on longevity with quality of life in old age. I had another thing here talking to me. Well, first of all, I'd like to say good afternoon to our audience in Brazil and a good morning to those joining us from Loma Linda. Welcome to the International Seminar on Longevity with Quality of Life in Old Age. It's very good to have participants from both Brazil and US, and we are grateful for your presence here. Thank you very much. This event is a collaboration among Loma Linda University, Unifesp, and UNASP. Yeah, it aims to share valuable insights on longevity and aging with quality of life. And I'd like to extend special thanks to our organizing teams from Loma Linda University, Unifesp, and UNASP for their dedication in making this seminar possible. Thank you very much. First of all, introducing in this first moment, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Felipe Mazzotti, who will lead us in a welcome in prayer. Dr. Mazzotti holds a PhD in Old Testament studies from Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary and is currently a professor of Hebrew Bible and exegesis at Adventist College of Paraná. We are honored to have him with us to begin our section. Please, Dr. Felipe Mazzotti.
Yes, thank you, Frederico. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon for those who are wherever they are. So it's good to be with you guys here. And it is an honor for me to begin the talks about this important topic that we're going to discuss during these days. So as a scholar in Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, my point here will be briefly deal with the topic of the role and significance of the elderly in the Hebrew Bible. So the idea is skate over some texts and understand important insights that we can get from them and how the Hebrew Bible talks about elderly in that regard. So yeah, the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, foundational text for Judaism and Christianity, offers a profound insight or several profound insights into human life, morality, and community. Among the many themes woven throughout its narratives is the treatment and representation of old age. In a society that often emphasizes youth and vigor, the Hebrew Bible provides a counter-narrative that highlights the wisdom, authority, and dignity of the elderly. Our conversation today and what I'm doing here briefly explore the multifaceted roles of old people in the Hebrew Bible. And we are going to examine briefly how their presence enriches biblical narratives and reflects the values of ancient Israelite society, which is really interesting for our discussion here. Additionally, we will analyze the portrayal of God as an elder figure, embodying ultimate wisdom and authority. So old age in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament is often depicted with a mix of reverence and caution. So the term elder or old man in Hebrew, zachen, conveys not just age, but also a status of respect and authority. Old age is frequently associated with wisdom in the Bible, experience, and also with a connection to tradition. For example, one of the texts that I think it's important for us to read is in Proverbs 16, verse 31, where we read, "The silver-haired head is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life." So this text is really interesting. It suggests that aging is not merely a biological process in the Bible, but a moral and a social achievement, signifying a life well lived. It is really common in the Bible, this type of description of the old or the elder, in a way that they achieve something. They achieve a higher status in society. Actually, in ancient Israel itself, old age was often viewed as a blessing, as I'm saying. So another text that is really interesting in that regard is Psalm 92, verse 12 to verse 15, where we read, "The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those who are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bear fruit in old age. They shall be fresh and flourishing in old age." This is a really special text. So here, the righteous are compared to flourishing palm trees, growing strong even in old age. This text actually suggests that those who live in accordance with God's will remain vibrant and fruitful regardless of their age, which is one of the tenets of Adventist life, actually. So this biblical perspective counters modern notions of aging as a time of decline, instead of portraying it as a stage of life filled with potential for growth and wisdom. It's quite different of the actual figure that or vision that we usually have in modern society. One of the most prominent roles actually of the elderly in the Hebrew Bible is that of the wise leader or counselor. We see this throughout the Hebrew Bible. Figures such as Moses, for example, who was 120 years old at his death. We find this information in Deuteronomy 34, verse 7. Leaders like him embody this archetype of important elders and leaders in society. Moses' leadership itself is characterized in the Bible by his profound wisdom and experience, qualities that are crucial for guiding the Israelites through their tumultuous journey in the wilderness. His age appears in the Pentateuch. This is amazing, actually, as something that grants him the authority to interpret God's laws and to lead the people with a sense of purpose and direction. So it is precisely because he's an elder that he is authorized to interpret those laws and to guide people. So there's something with the elder life that it is really important in the Hebrew Bible. Similarly, we see other figures such as King Solomon, who was renowned for his wisdom, often reflecting the ideal of the elderly as a source of guidance. When the Bible tells that it's a surprise for a young man like Solomon, by then a wise man, it shows that surprise stems from the idea that wisdom should come from aging and not from such a youth life as he had. For example, he wrote the book of Proverbs, and sometimes in some of those passages that he wrote, he emphasizes the importance of listening to the counsel of life. For example, the book of Proverbs, we go now to chapter 23, verse 22, where he says, "Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old." This is really interesting, coming from the mouth of Solomon. Here, the biblical text underscores the value of intergenerational relationships and the respect owed to elders. Solomon's reign also highlights the role of the elderly in making crucial decisions for the welfare of the nation, further solidifying their importance in leadership. Another example is the narrative of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who also illustrates the significant role of the elderly in leadership and counsel. We're not going to read this because it's a long narrative, but we find this in Exodus 18. There, Jethro observes Moses' struggle to govern the people alone and offers practical advice to delegate responsibilities. This encounter actually highlights the importance of wisdom that comes from experience, as Jethro's counsel allows Moses to lead more effectively and ensures that the needs of the people are met. This very interesting collaboration between generations illustrates in the Bible how the elderly can play a vital role in shaping the direction of society, which was a really important role for them in ancient society. In addition to these roles that we find in the Hebrew Bible, the elderly in that text serve as essential pillars of the community. There's a relationship actually between old age and community structure, communal structure. The structure of ancient Israelite society actually emphasized the importance of family and community ties. Elders often held positions of authority within their clans and tribes, making decisions that affected the welfare of their communities, as I already said. So, for instance, an example is the book of Ruth, where Boaz, a respected elder in his city in Bethlehem, plays a pivotal role in ensuring the well-being of Naomi and Ruth, demonstrating the communal responsibility of the elderly. And in his willingness to act as a kinsman redeemer, he underscores the elderly's role in preserving family integrity and caring for those in need in Israelite society. So the Hebrew Bible also advocates another facet of the elderly in the Hebrew Bible is that it advocates for the care and respect of the elderly, recognizing their contributions to society. So an interesting text goes to Leviticus 19:32. Leviticus 19:32, now in a legal text, actually, that prescribes important things for the society, we read the following: "You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man, and fear your God. I am the Lord." This is an even more interesting text because it aligns the respect for elders with the respect for God. So the idea of respecting and showing respect for those who actually are in their older age is aligned in the text again with the respect for God. This verse not only affirms then the dignity of the elderly, but also highlights the moral obligation of the younger generation to care for and honor them. Such teachings reflect a societal value system where old age is seen as a time of wisdom and respect, deserving of honor and care. This is really special of the Bible and how the Bible describes, especially in the Hebrew Bible, those types of relationships. The very community's relationship with the elderly is further illustrated in the practice of gleaning, as depicted back now in the book of Ruth that I just mentioned. So there Boaz again provides for Ruth. He ensures that she can gather grain without being harmed. He's an elder in the city. This act of kindness not only illustrates Boaz's character, but also demonstrates how the community is responsible for protecting and providing for its vulnerable members, including the elderly. The connection between individual acts of kindness and community ethics showcases the importance of fostering relationships that honor and care for the aged. But a very special facet of that representation is when the Bible represents God himself as an elder. So in addition to all these figures that we saw, the Hebrew Bible also portrays him, God, in a manner that embodies the qualities of an elder. God is often depicted as a wise and nurture figure, providing guidance and support to the Israelites. The image of God as a shepherd is particularly poignant in this context. The Psalm 23, for example, begins with the declaration, "The Lord is my shepherd." We know the passage. I shall not want. I'm not saying that the shepherd here is an old man, but that the wisdom that stems from the words and that are applied to him here are to be expected from wise men and wise women, and that is to say elders in that society. This imagery conveys a sense of care, protection, and guidance, reminiscent of the wisdom that comes with age. Furthermore, God's covenant with the people of Israel is often portrayed as a fatherly relationship. For example, another text that's really important in that regard is Deuteronomy 32 verse 6, where we read, "Do you thus deal with the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father who bought you? Has he not made you and established you?" This language of fatherhood reflects the authority and care associated with the elderly in the Hebrew Bible, who couldn't have kids up until their elders or their long years ahead. So emphasizing that God, like a wise elder, this text desires or shows that the desire for the well-being of his people and provides guidance for their lives comes from the elders. Moreover, other prophets like the Isaiah presents God not only as an elder or as a father, but also as a mother. We see this in Isaiah 66, verse 13. So the dual image that the Hebrew Bible gives to God as both a father and a mother enriches the understanding of divine authority and care, and reinforces the notion that wisdom and compassion are inherent qualities of aged figures. God's character in these depictions aligns with the biblical view of the elderly as wise, authoritative, and nurturing, inviting the community to seek his guidance and protection. But a scene, a representation that really calls my attention in the Hebrew Bible is when God appearing as like an elder. There's a particular text that we find in Daniel 7 that shows that. That chapter is actually a particularly powerful portrayal of God as an elder, and that depiction it's quite fantastic actually in the way that the Bible uses this elder figure to talk about God. In this passage, we're not going to read it; it's long, but in that passage, God is referred to as the Ancient of Days. That passage is in Aramaic. The expression there is atik yomin, and emphasizes the eternal existence of God, his wisdom and his authority, which is interesting because that idea of God being wise, eternal, and authoritative stems from the perception of the elder within the Israelite society. So the description of God in this chapter presents him as seated on a throne, dressed in garments as white as snow, and with hair like pure wool. This is a really beautiful picture of God, an elder seated on a throne and judging. This imagery conveys not only the timeless nature of God, but also aligns him with the attributes often associated with the elderly: wisdom, purity, and authority, which is how they saw the elders at those times. The title Ancient of Days then signifies that God transcends time. He embodies the ultimate wisdom that comes with eternity. In a world characterized by change and uncertainty, the portrayal of God as the Ancient of Days serves as a source of comfort and stability for the people of Israel in those times. Just as well, his timelessness assures them of his enduring presence and commitment to justice. In the broader context of Daniel 7, God's authority as the Ancient of Days is contrasted with earthly kingdoms and rulers, emphasizing the true power resides with him alone, and that power stems from wisdom, which was seen as a quality of the elders. So additionally, this title reinforces the idea that just as elders in society are respected or were respected in his times for their wisdom and experience, God, as the Ancient of Days, commands reverence and honor. The depiction of him in this manner invites believers to approach him with a respect due to a wise elder, acknowledging his guidance and authority over their lives and history. The Ancient of Days serves not only as a ruler, but also as a protector and guide, embodying the qualities of an ideal elder in those times, someone who would seek the welfare of his people. Well, despite the reverence afforded to the elderly, as I'm speaking here, the Hebrew Bible also acknowledges the challenges that come with aging. The physical decline associated with old age is depicted in various narratives. We see this throughout the Hebrew Bible as well. One example would be Isaac in his old age, and him experiencing blindness. We see this in Genesis, around Genesis 27, at the end of the Isaac cycle there. This symbolizes the vulnerability that can accompany the later stages of life. This portrayal serves as a reminder that old age is not without its difficulties, and it challenges the community to provide support and care for the elders, even as they respect them for their wisdom. Moreover, the fear of being marginalized is evident in several other narratives in the Hebrew Bible about the elderly. So in 1 Samuel 8, for example, very interesting narrative, when the Israelites demand a king, the elders feel their authority undermined by the desire of a monarchy. This tension illustrates the precarious position of the elderly in a changing society, reflecting broader themes of power dynamics and generational shifts. The desire for a king reflects a societal shift that threatens the traditional authority of the elders, emphasizing the need for communities to adapt while still valuing the wisdom of their elders. So these are the ideas that I draw from the text. Again, it's a skating over the data. We have much more, but what do we get from these few ideas that I bring here from the Bible? Well, first, the representation of old people in the Hebrew Bible is rich and complex, highlighting their roles as wise leaders, community pillars, and bearers of tradition. While the text celebrates the dignity and authority of the elderly, it also addresses the challenges and vulnerabilities they face. Through these narratives, we saw the Hebrew Bible calls for a deep respect for the elderly and underscores the importance of intergenerational relationships. Additionally, second, the portrayal of God as an elder figure further enriches this theme, particularly through the depiction of God as the Ancient of Days we saw in Daniel 7. This representation invites us to recognize the divine qualities of wisdom, authority, and care that are often associated with old age. These are divine, in the Bible, divine qualities. These come with ages. They come with age, and they are communicated by God himself. As we reflect on the role of the elderly in the Hebrew Bible, we are invited to reconsider how we view aging in our own lives and communities. By embracing the wisdom of our elders and fostering intergenerational relationships, we can enrich our understanding of life, morality, and community, echoing the timeless teachings found within these sacred texts we just opened. So, in a world that often prioritizes youth, to use that phrase again, the biblical perspective offers a profound reminder of the value of age, wisdom, and the shared human experience across generations. The elderly are not merely remnants of the past, but are integral to the fabric of society, guiding, nurturing, and teaching the next generations. As we honor our elders, we not only affirm their contributions, but also strengthen the bonds that hold our communities together, reflecting the divine wisdom and love that God exemplifies in his relationship with humanity. God aligns himself with the experience of the elder. And that's a beautiful thing to learn from the Bible. So this is what I would like to share with you guys. And I would also like to invite those who feel comfortable for us to pray now and ask God's presence between us, among us, for the beginning of our work here. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for having in your word, having from the Hebrew Bible, those beautiful pictures about the elderly and how you align yourself with them, with the wisdom, authority, and guidance that we see in them. Help us here to learn more how to better care for them and how to better understand that stage of life, and so honor you, honor yourself as you align yourself, as we said, with them. Please be with us and help us to be with you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
I do thank you, Dr. Mazzotti, for these very special words. Thank you very much. We have to think on them. And next, I would like to just a brief introductions to our next speakers. First, we're going to listen to Professor Ramos, Director of Aging Studies at Unifesp, who will present the experience Epidoso in Brazil. After him, we'll hear Dr. Gary Fraser, Distinguished Professor at Loma Linda University, and he will discuss and show us, mainly to show us in Brazil, about the blue zones and their connection to longevity. After all, we are going to listen to Dr. Everton Padilha from UNASP. We'll share some insights on assessing health in elderly population in developing countries. Well, let's start our speakers. And just to finish the introductions, would like to say that with support of Cap Sprint, Professor Luis Ramos had the opportunity to visit Loma Linda to explore one of the blue zones, and we'd like to bring us this knowledge. Building on that visit, we saw a great opportunity to bring our institutions together in this international seminar, fostering collaboration in research and promoting sharing learning. Now, please, Professor Luis Roberto Ramos. He is a physician with a PhD from University of London, a distinguished professor here at Unifesp. Dr. Ramos is the director of an aging studies sector at Unifesp and collaborates the longevity team of the Cap Sprint Unifesp project. He'll be presenting the experience Epidoso Brazil, sharing insights from this valuable work. Professor Ramos, please.
So how it would
Go to the green square on the bottom.
and
So we did this week. And this is your slides, right?
am I going to
Yes.
appear or just a slide? Yeah.
There you are on the side.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, good morning to everybody in Brazil and everybody here in Loma Linda. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be talking in this university about aging and longevity. And as Frederico has said, we have to thank CAPES, which is the financing agency of Brazil, that put forward a project for international collaboration between universities in Brazil to foster the internationalization of the post-graduation in Brazil. And my university got part of this project, and I got part of the project for the team longevity, and that's what enables us to bring this collaboration to Loma Linda, which I expect we can have a long-lasting relationship. So I'm going to show data on the Epidoso study, which is a cohort study that we started in 1991, and we were able to identify risk factors for healthy aging. And after that, we start doing small interventions to see if we can promote healthier aging. Yeah, I like this slide because it pictures the process, you know, children, young adult, and elderly. The difference is that in the past, this was the most prevalent group in the population, and nowadays everybody is actually reaching this stage of life with all the benefits and the problems that this can bring. I'm gonna briefly go through how Brazil is aging, you know, in these last 70 years. I'm from the generation of the 1950s. At that time, infant mortality was 150 per 1,000 live births, so we dropped 10 times the infant mortality. Life expectancy went up 30 years, it was 45, now it's 75. Fertility drops 3 times. We used to have more than 6 children per woman in the fertile period. Now it's less than 2. So we are already below the replacement age and replacement figure. We already are the 6th largest elderly population in the world. We have more than 32 million people over 60. The 80 plus is the fastest growing age group. And the demographic window, unfortunately, is about to close because fertility went down and everybody is living even more. And 60 plus is the group. 60 plus group is supposed to surpass the 0 to 14 by 2040. This is just a figure to show. This is the pyramid in 1980. And this is the present pyramid, which is not a pyramid anymore, actually. So we have this, the base of the pyramid narrowing and the top of the pyramid enlarging, you know. We already have like 23 million people over the age of 60, which represents more than 11%. And the Brazilian population is supposed to start declining by 2042. The consequences in these last 70 years, cardiovascular diseases arose from as a cause of death from 10% to 38%. Infectious diseases dropped from 40% at that time to 5% of the causes of death. 95% of the population 60 plus has at least one chronic disease to take care. 93% refer at least one chronic medication. 30% experience some dependence in activities of daily living. And primary health care that were structured for maternal and child care now has to face a big change. And 60 plus, although they represent, as I said, like 10%, they occupy twice as much hospital beds and cost 3 times as much as other age groups to be cared by the national health system. So we have polymorbidity, like 15% have more than 5 chronic conditions. Polypharmacy, like 20% take more than 5 medications a day. Severe dependency affects 15% that need help for at least 7 ADLs. And we have to recognize the inequalities in Brazil in which precarious living conditions affect like 30% of the population. So this is a kind of an explosive combination for a country to deal with. So in face of that, we established this Epidoso project as a longitudinal study that started in 1991. It has been going on for 30 years in a middle-class neighborhood in São Paulo. That's to say that what you're going to see is from a population that don't represent the whole of Brazilian population, because this population is more educated and higher socioeconomic status than the average for Brazil. So everything that I show here should be less good or less prevalent in more poorer and less educated areas of Brazil. Our goal was to assess health and well-being using multidimensional tools to identify factors associated with healthy aging and identify the real mortality risk factors for this population. this is the beginning of the study. We published this, the start of this 2-year follow-up of elderly residents in Brazil. This is the concrete jungle where we live, you know, this is the university and this is the center of aging, and the population comes from this surrounding here. You know, this is São Paulo city, and this is the district that we are talking about, and this is the area that we define as the area for the project. The population around this area is 132,000 people living there. And here, 21% is over the age of 60. And we have a very high IDH, which is a measure of development of the population. This is my center, the Center for the Study of Aging, where we had 2 cohorts, one in 1991 with 1,600 people over 65. And in 2006, we renewed the cohort with another 1,100, but now with 60 plus. In both situations, we had domiciliary in household interviews and geriatric assessment and gerontological assessment. We collect blood and we did clinical examinations. And he used this EPOC for measuring physical activity. This is a typical member of the cohort. And this is a design that the first cohort has four waves. You know, we started with 65, and then we did 2 years and more 2 years and more 2 years. And we end up with few ones over the age of 65. The first 2 waves, we did it with households interviews. And after that, we start following them in the center, giving clinical assistance and doing the updates at the center. The second cohort, starting in 2006, we again did household interviews. And we had the second wave that is missing here that took them to the 2020 year. Just to give you, this was a mistake here that this is, again, we don't have more men than women. As everybody else, we have more women than men. So it's just a problem with the names here. But anyway, we have a wave 1, wave 2, and wave 3. And just to the age distribution, like males and females, the age distribution went up as the cohort aged. Smoking, a lot of smoking there, you know, more for men, you know, like more than 50% of the men were smoking. Sleeping disorders also very high, you know. Cognitive performance in the mini-mental, as I said, it's a very well-educated population, so the average was quite high, you know, near 30 points, which is the maximum, but with outliers here all the time. Body mass remain in average normal with outliers. Time up and go as a measure of mobility was okay too. We had systolic and diastolic pressures a bit high. And then in this sense, it's I want to mark it because although the prevalence of 62% of hypertension doesn't differ too much from other countries, the trouble here was that we realized that 36% of the hypertensives weren't treating at all. 46% weren't treating at all. 36% were treating but not controlling the hypertension. So only 18% of the elderly were hypertensive, taking medication and having a normal pressure. So everybody else was still at the risk of having consequences. In terms of depression, we use an instrument that will identify dysthymia, and this affects like 1/5 of the population more amongst women. And if we count the number of diseases, we're going to see that 1/3 of the population there had at least 5 chronic diseases to take care of. Only 6% said, no, I have no chronic disease at this point. This is a lot, almost everybody having to wear glasses, and the percentage using hearing aids went up as the age goes up. I'm in this part here of the curve, already having to, to use one. And the geriatric depression scale, as I said, we had a cutoff of 5. So in general, no depression, but outliers everywhere. Physical activity, we consider the total epoch, so it is not only leisure time physical activity, so they look pretty active here. But if we look at the physical activity in leisure time, is much less. It's like 25% will have leisure time physical activity. So this will count transport activity, household activities, and other things. So that's why so high the level of activity. And just to remind the curve, the survival curve, you have the first 20 years, you have no problem, then you start having chronic morbidity. And part of this chronic morbidity will develop disability. So we are looking at, years lived with incapacity that the Global Burden of Disease published in 1996. And we see that depression, for instance, is one of the leading causes of diseases that cause dependence in daily life. And nobody takes too much attention to depression, unfortunately. And all the red ones are mental problems, you see. So mental problems is a very serious cause of disease. And for Brazil, which is third world, is a leading cause. And these causes here are now affecting Brazil, but it's more for developed countries. This is what I call the life stair, the life ladder, We start here being able to do everything in life, but at some point we need help for shopping. Almost 50% of the cohort already had need for shopping, or need for transport, or need for doing the banking, for taking the right medications, to keep a continent, for being able to walk. 9% was already needing help to walk. And then the high dependency threshold, when people need help for dressing, for bathing, for eating, for self-care, for going to a toilet, or 4% that needs help for getting in and out of bed. So our task was to see how can we slow down the go down in this ladder. Putting all together, 33% of the cohort was totally independent. They were in the top of the ladder then. 39% has light dependency, 30% moderate dependency, and 15% severe dependence, which means that they cross that threshold. They need care in daily life at home. If we go for age groups, 16% were already in the severe dependency age group, and the severe dependency in ADL. Only 34% were totally independent, and half was moderately dependent. And of course, if we go up in the age structure, over 80s, more than a third were already in the severe dependency group. In terms of cognition, 30% failed the mini-mental, so 70% were okay, but 30% were showing cognitive decline. To know if they were demented or not, we use this instrument, clinical dementia rating, that bypass the educational bias, because mini-mental has a strong educational bias. So the clinical dementia rating bypassed that by interviewing the spouse or the carer in terms of how is he doing and doing his activities of daily living like he used to? Do you notice any difference on that? And so by then, we can classify the person as normal, no decline, as already demented, or as a borderline case, which is he or she is not normal anymore, but it doesn't have data for classifying as dementia. So almost 40% of the cohort were in this borderline group, and this is, in public health terms, is the group that we want to tackle, because they already show signs of that they might get demented, but they are not yet. So this is the place to invest. So this cohort, we looked at the mortality risk factors, and the mortality for the whole cohort was almost 10%. All these conditions here showed a mortality, all these conditions at baseline showed a mortality higher than the average, like being a man, being too old, perceiving health as bad, having had a stroke before, being incontinent at baseline, having had falls at baseline, being at the hospital at the baseline, having crossed the high dependency threshold, showing signs of depression, and showing signs of cognitive decline. All these factors showed in a 2x2 table a greater mortality than the average. But when we did a logistic regression, and we published that in 2001 in JAGS, we saw that dependency and activities of daily living and cognitive impairment strongly predicted mortality in this cohort. And here's the result of the logistic regression. Like age, being 80 is twice as risk of somebody with 60. Being a man is quite a risk in comparison with women. Having been in a hospital, it's also a great risk. Having cognitive impairment, it's also increased significantly the risk, but the highest risk was people who had crossed that severe dependency in daily life. So we realized that and of course we were controlling for the number of diseases, and no chronic diseases appear as an independent factor for mortality. So we said, well, we have to control the diseases, but we have to act to try to slow down the loss of function. We start looking at function as the proxy for health. You can have as many diseases as you want, but if you keep functioning well, if you are independent and autonomous, I'll say you're healthy, you know. So we start looking at new health indicators. The main one is functional capacity, meaning physical independence and cognitive autonomy. And as I will show at the end, now WHO has named this intrinsic capacity of the elderly. So your intrinsic capacity is what will say the level of health you hold. Of course, we have to be careful, be concerned about the level of stress, either mental or biological, difficult to measure and difficult to act. And quality of life as a health indicator too, looking at subjective satisfaction, and also the new variable that is even each day more important, which is the social capital that the person has, you know, in terms of family, friends, work, whatever, that will help him keep independence in life. I'm sorry for the Portuguese here, but we did an analysis on what will protect against functional loss based on our results. And all these white one was risk factors, so increase the risk of functional loss, being aging, being cognitively impaired, asthma, hypertension, and diabetes contribute to losing function, but still having a paid work, having friends, and being able to do manual activities were all protective factors. So reinforcing the notion that you need to have a social network with you, being active in terms of social meetings and things like that. Magic words in this aging paradigm for me is health promotion that will have to face change in habits and behavior, which is very difficult. Integrated care, we need a multi-professional team. And we need to think seriously about domiciliary care, using valid screening instruments to know who needs, and social interactions, promote cultural, sports, and social interaction as much as possible. The million-dollar question is, what is the best strategy to make a population of sedentary people turn active and remain so? How do we change people's eating habits? How do we promote cognitive stimulation at populational level? How can we limit environmental stress? How to improve compliance to chronic medications and treatments? I believe this last one is the only one that doctors can tackle, you know, by having a more close relationship with patients, because they are the ones who prescribe, and eventually the person doesn't take, don't keep the treatment. I also say that, you know, in the past, when infectious diseases were the most prevalent cause, everybody would say, well, 1 week of antibiotics and that's it, you know. But nowadays, you have to say, well, you have to take this antihypertensive drug, not for 1 week, but for the rest of your life. And there's a different message that has to be taken, you know. And for promoting health in this paradigm, I think the nudge theory that gave this guy a Nobel Prize is the way. You know, you have to be creative and on how to make people do exercise, and how to make people change their eating habits, and how to make people change their lives to be a longer, healthier life. This is just fun, but you know, TVs got slimmer, but people got fatter, because now they have the remote control, you know. And the question is, the million-dollar question is, what was the trick to make these ladies out of the afternoon television and put them on the beach to do exercise? That's the trick that worth $1 million, you know. Here is the prevalence, as I said, of physical activity measured with all the dimensions. And can you see the leisure time physical activity? Only 26% were active in that dimension. So what we did to do the trick, you know, we'd survey the area of the cohort and find every other place that person could do exercise. Could be a formal academy, could be the back of the church where twice a week a person goes and give lectures, whatever. The park with the equipment, some plazas there have equipment for exercise. So we map everything, and then a physical educator sat down with this map within this gear for all these places, and said, look, you are sedentary, that's not good for you, and took a compass and say, well, 500 meters around your place, you're gonna find this, this, and that you can do either free or paying physical exercise. And that worked, because we tried before putting a physical educator at disposal in a place where people will go and have it free. While the physical educator was there, everything was fine. You took off the physical educator, everybody went home and never do exercise again. So in this way, we had these three groups. We had the people who did nothing. We have a people where the doctor actually prescribed physical exercise. And we have the group where the physical educator sat down and did this teaching of what they could do around. And you see that, and it's this blue line that, you know, you had a significant increase in the number of minutes per week that you do exercise, and the intervention end up here. And we see that it wasn't a very serious decline. The people kept doing exercise even after we stopped phoning them and asking how they were. We are at the end realized that the intervention has lasted. How to tackle cognitive impairment in population terms? We start doing digital literacy for people who never were in a computer before, and we realize that you know the business of learning how to deal with the computer, with the internet, and to do things that they never thought about doing, like sending an email to a grandchildren that is living abroad, you know. So that's stimulated them, and we realized by looking at the data we applied, in this case, we applied the MOCA for measuring the cognitive decline, and these people did much better than a control group that just kept life going, and they declined cognition, and this group actually even improved cognition in some cases. And finally, now we are talking about intrinsic capacity, which is what have 5 dimensions. The vitality dimension takes care of the mobility, the medications, the biomarkers, the strength, the nutritional status. All this will give a score for vitality. Gait, march, walkability, dimension of mobility. 2 things that we don't usually value too much, with being able to see, being able to hear as a sensory dimension. Cognitive dimension, looking at memory and cognitive abilities, and the psychological dimension that leads with motivation and behavior, and of course the risk factor here is depression. So all these dimensions will interact with what we think the 4 basic results that we want to avoid, which is getting highly dependent in activities of daily living, being a faller with frequent falls, being hospitalized, and of course the worst one of the outcomes with death. So this is our framework for working right now. We want to establish a new cohort to follow them with these indicators. We already have published publications showing that all these dimensions tend to decline, but what we need to know is what is the normal rate of decline for each of these dimensions. You know, and the 5 dimensions are here, you know. And our objective right now, we already developed a protocol for an aged cohort to create a single indicator that expresses the trajectory of intrinsic capacity over the years and its relation to functional ability. So I can classify elderly people as intrinsic capacity index above the average, below the average, or on the average. And if his or she is below the average, that's the population I want to tackle, you know. Apart from controlling all the chronic diseases, giving glasses for the blind, giving earphones for the dumb, but that's basic, you know. But if I evaluate that the intrinsic capacity so far is below the average, I have to identify what is the dimension that I can act to keep him as much as possible independent and autonomous in his life. Special thanks to the 3 on the other side that helped me to be here and to produce this this presentation here. Alessandra, Federico, and Monica, 3 good friends and ex-PhD students, nowadays postdoc students. This is my address there, where I base my the Progetto Epidoso, the Epidoso project. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Ramos made a very good presentation on Epidoso that we still have a lot of information to work with. And now, let's listen to Dr. Gary Fraser, Distinguished Professor of Preventive Medicine and Public Health at Loma Linda University. Dr. Fraser is also a professor at the School of Medicine. His presentation will focus on blue zones areas in the world where people live significantly longer and the factors contributing to their longevity. Please, Professor.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and certainly appreciated Professor Ramos's presentation, and I should say I'd like to thank him. It does seem like he's, at least from our perspective, been the main motivator for this seminar and also the forum that comes tomorrow. For those here at Loma Linda, I thought maybe I'd just take a moment to explain just the three institutions that are involved here. We all know about Loma Linda University, I think. Professor Ramos and a number of his colleagues are from the Federal University at Sao Paulo, which is a large federal institution. And there is a collaboration, we hope, that will continue from with the Adventist University in Sao Paulo, UNASP, and a number of colleagues from that institution are also here. So turning now to my presentation, I should say at the outset that the research group that I represent is really mostly focused on nutrition. Nutrition in relation to cardiovascular disease, in relation to cancer, more recently in relation to some neurological diseases, which I'll show you a little bit about, and also to longevity. And it was really this last one and a paper that we published more than 20 years ago now that led to Loma Linda being considered a blue zone. And we're a little bit of a different blue zone to some of the others in the sense, as I'll show you, we have never been focused on the number of people who say live more than 100 years of age, which is what a number of the other blue zones have worked with, but rather we've been much more interested in moving the whole population up. And particularly preventing premature deaths, which I think is something that we will be able to talk about. So moving on. Oh, I should say also that
In the mouse.
yeah, here is it.
Oops.
There, okay. I should say, perhaps before I go into this, that there is a sub-study that you're going to hear more about from the next presenter and even more tomorrow, that does focus more on stressful events during the life, the practice and beliefs of religion, depressive feelings, and also function that Dr. Morton will talk about tomorrow, and Dr. Lee right after my presentation today. And I'm not going to say terribly much about that. I should also point out that Dr. Jerry Lee, who was online here as one of the observers, was also one of the original originators and a very important colleague in this other sub-study that I'm not going to talk about today. I'm going to focus much more on nutrition. So the Adverse Health Study, the basic study, is a very traditional cohort design. It was funded by the National Institutes of Health. Expensive study. This kind of work in the United States has been very expensive. People were enrolled between 2002 and 2007, and we finally enrolled about 96,000 people. 25,000 of them were African American. Much smaller numbers were Hispanic and Asian. These people came from every state in the United States and actually every province and territory in Canada, although only about 5,000 from Canada. And they were all Seventh-day Adventists. And I imagine most of you know something about Adventists, but they're an interesting research population. So I'll come back to that perhaps in a moment, but just to point out that in a cohort study like this, at the beginning of the study, the idea is that you identify the population and then you measure some what we call exposures. In our case, we had about a 50-page questionnaire, but a lot of that was given over to diet, but many other things. And then you follow them up over a period of time, in our case, 10 to 20 years, and collect all the new cases of diseases and deaths that accrue during that period of time. And then you can do interesting things like comparing the rates of new diseases, comparing, for instance, the vegetarians and non-vegetarians, or those who exercise, those that don't, or those who are black and those who are white, or those who began the study very old and those who were younger, and so on and so on. So it's a very powerful study design. So why focus on Adventists? So only half, approximately, in the United States are vegetarian. And that's because the Adventist Church recommends this, but it's not mandated. And so you can see this kind of sets up a natural experiment. It's not randomized. So we need to be very careful in looking for other things that might distinguish the vegetarians and non-vegetarians in other ways. But to a large extent, you can call it a natural experiment, I think. Other features of the population that are helpful: there's no cigarette smoking and little, in fact, usually no alcohol consumption. And they're also interested in good health and care of their bodies. And I think part of the genius of Adventism, in a way, in this regard, is that being part of a religion, taking good care of one's body becomes a religious virtue. And perhaps that's worth a little bit more discussion. How can there be analogues of that outside of maybe religion, because it's a strong motivator, the kind of thing Professor Ramos has been speculating about. So back to nutrition. We were able to talk about 4 different kinds of people that we called kind of vegetarians as compared to non-vegetarians. Nearly half the population were non-vegetarians, by which we mean they ate red meats at least once a week. But these were a fairly health-conscious population, even so, because most of them were eating on average red meat only 1 to 2 times a week, and poultry 1 to 2 times a week. So they were low meat. The vegans are those who consume no animal products at all, no dairy, no eggs, no meats. The lacto-ovos, which were the majority of the vegetarian Adventists, they consume dairy and eggs, but no flesh foods, no fish. Pesco-vegetarians, like a lacto-ovo vegetarian, but they do consume some fish only. And then the semi-vegetarians will consume some red meats, but altogether less than once a week. So they were the groups that we focused on. We followed up for mortality so far through to the end of about 2015. It's kind of an expensive exercise. We were able to match to the National Death Index, so it was a computerized process. The age of enrollment to the study, they just had to be over the age of 30. and the average age was about 62 at the time they were enrolled. So now you can see they're becoming quite an aged population. I might say that our oldest enrollee was 109. She needed some help because her eyesight was not so good to fill out the 50-page questionnaire, and her 91-year-old daughter helped her with that. So that she had some good family genes or good lifestyle, I'm not sure which. So we gathered dietary data by a detailed food frequency questionnaire. I didn't mention it, but we gave a lot of attention to validating the questionnaire. So we had about 1,000 people that were randomly selected from this population, that they gave us 6 24-hour dietary recalls. Half of them at one part of the year and half of them in another. So we used that as a means of trying to validate our dietary questionnaire. And on about 2,700 subjects, we do have blood collected and stored. So we were able to follow up for new cancers. As far as I know, we're probably the only study, even yet, who has matched separately by computer to every one of the quite independent cancer registries that are mandated federally in every state in the United States, but they all have their own administration. And it was quite a task, I can tell you. But we've done that, except for the state of Maine, that we could not make an arrangement with. We were also able to follow up for deaths, which I've just mentioned, National Death Index, and just something more recent. We are now have an agreement with the Medicare system, which is a national healthcare system for those over the age of 65. And about 44,000 of our subjects did belong to Medicare. And so we can get fairly full medical records on those subjects, and we're just starting to look at that. So I'm just going to focus here. We have about, there's about 400 plus papers published in the peer-reviewed literature on the health of Adventists. About 200 come from our last study, which is the study I'm largely going to talk about that we call Adventist Health Study 2 or AHS 2. So I'm going to just mention heart attacks and nut consumption. I'm actually came from a previous study just in California of 32,000 Adventists. The whole idea of Adventists being a blue zone, and another slight difference from other blue zones, and one that's a bit confusing. Loma Linda has got the reputation of a blue zone. Loma Linda is a small community, a small town where we all live here in Southern California. But actually the publication which led to Loma Linda being considered blue zone was an analysis of 34,000 Adventists who live all over the state of California. So that's really the blue zone. It is California Adventists, in fact, national Adventists. I'm going to talk a little bit about dairy consumption in relation to breast and prostate cancer and vegetarian dietary habits and causes of death, and some interesting stuff about neurological deaths. And then I'll make mention of some of the omics, metabolomics, DNA methylomics that we have started to dabble in. So first of all, this comes from our previous study, even a large study, and gained a lot of attention back in the early 1990s, where we were able to show, in our data at least, and this is multivariate adjusted, that these are those who consume nuts less than once a week, 1 to 4 times a week, at least 5 times a week in men and a woman. And you can see the risk of definite coronary events during follow-up. And these were very carefully analyzed. We obtained electrocardiograms from hospital admissions and so forth. And you can see the more nuts you consume, adjusting for a variety of other risk factors and dietary factors, the rate went down. And in fact, I'm only showing you this one slide, but we cut the population in about 18 different ways, not only men and women. We can look at vegetarians and non-vegetarians and nut consumption within each of those groups, those who exercised, those who didn't, and on and on and on. And we nearly always found this relationship. And so other studies have subsequently found the same thing. And so now the American Heart Association and a number of others recognize that modest nut consumption appears to give some protection against heart attack. I'd like to turn now to life expectancy, and this is some of the data that gave us the label Blue Zone. And Professor Ramos introduced the concept a little bit of a survival curve. So at the age of 30, if we applied a life table process to our data, everyone was alive. By definition, they had to be to join the study at age 30. And at least a few of them may not have been, but I don't think so. And of course, as time goes on, then the proportion who are surviving gets less and less until down here, notice the zero is a little bit, yeah, I'm not sure why we have a minus quantity there. But this means that nearly everyone has deceased by the age of 100. And this is the curve applied to the average Californian citizen, fairly all non-Adventists. This is the curve from our Adventist Health Study 1 in this case, because it was just in California. And this was based, of course, on hundreds of thousands of deaths here and about 5,000 deaths here. So the error bars here are very tight. And these differences, and this is a curve just measuring the difference at different ages. And so you can see the greatest difference is really in the middle to older years, and things become closer and closer in the extremely elderly. We can express our findings that were actually quite surprising to us at the time, and in different ways. One way is to look at the percentage of people surviving. Say, let's focus on age 85. And you can see that in these different countries, these are the proportions who at this time, which was about 1985, 1990, were surviving to these age 85. In the United States, the men about 20%. In the California Adventists, it was double that. And if we looked amongst the vegetarian Adventists, it was nearly half. And the same thing in women. In the United States as a whole, about 40% of women were surviving to that age, but 54% of the Adventist women and 60% of those were vegetarians. Expressing it in a slightly different way, the extra years of life were about 7 extra years in the men and about 4.5 years in the female Adventists. If you looked just at the vegetarians, those numbers were somewhat higher yet. So quite a big deal. 7 and 4.5 years is, if it's good quality of life, and I suspect Dr. Morton might show you a little bit about that tomorrow, and we think it is good quality of life, that's really worth striving for, we think. Well, that was California I showed you about. Looking at things in a slightly different way, we published 5 or 6 years ago a very carefully done analysis comparing a US census population. Here, we give that a mortality score of 1, and they were nearly all non-Adventists, as you might imagine. And these spots here are the relative rates in the Adventists, the mortality rates from all cause. And we found that in those age 65, just predicting at that age, that there was about a 35%, 33% reduction in risk by being an Adventist as compared to the census. Not so much if you predicted at age 85, it was more like a 22% reduction. And interestingly, amongst the Black Adventists as compared to national Blacks, they had almost the same advantage. If we looked at deaths from cancers, these are not all cancers, they're deaths from cancers. Again, there seemed to be some advantage by being Adventist, and we dug into that much deeper, which I don't have time to show you this morning. And then other causes of death, interestingly, and this includes, of course, cardiovascular and a bunch of others. Again, that Adventist advantage seemed to persist. So the question is, why? We were somewhat limited in what we could adjust for, but we adjusted obviously for age and for gender, smoking habits. In fact, these here are non-smoking non-Adventists. We were able to filter out the smokers. We could adjust for education. We could adjust for region, state of residence, and everything stayed as it was. I want to just turn now to another dietary item, breast cancer and dairy milk intake, which this is interesting stuff. And I must say that a lot of other studies have looked at this, and our data is somewhat unique in showing a strong adverse association with long-term consumption of dairy milk and risk of breast cancer in the woman. This is again adjusted for a large variety of risk factors for breast cancer, everything that we could think of, and we had a lot of data. And one of the interesting things about this, notice here, this is log adjusted. That's why it looks more or less like a straight line. The interrupted is a spline for those statisticians amongst you that will know what will happen there, that we actually broke the curve into about 4 different places to look to see if there was any non-linearity, and there wasn't much. And this is unsplined, so these are the 95% confidence intervals. And the interesting thing is that by the time you got to 1/4 cup a day, we were also already seeing a fairly strong adverse signal. And in fact, it tended to flatten out somewhat, although it's not so clear on this log thing, after about 1 cup a day. So it was almost looked somewhat pharmaceutical. If we looked at prostate cancer and dairy intake, and this time it's not a log. In fact, if we had treated the breast cancer in the same way, the curve would have looked quite similar. And again, we see this phenomenon of a fairly rapid rise in risk with rather small quantities. There's only 1 cup of whole milk a day here, after which the curve tends to flatten out. So something is going on. And interestingly, if we looked at cheese and yogurt and did not find a signal, it seemed to be with milk. And there's a lot of speculation as to what could be going on here and what could be somewhat pharmaceutical. There's not very many studies have got a large amount of data down at these very low intakes, but because of our vegans and lacto-ovos who had a rather low intake of dairy, we could look at these things. Causes of death amongst vegetarians. Very recently published paper about a month ago. This time we had about 12,500 total deaths, and you can see about 1,000 in vegans. We have the largest study of vegans in the world. I think largest study of lacto-ovos as well, actually. 4,000 deaths amongst them and so on, and about 5,500 deaths in our comparison group, the non-vegetarian. So all of these are Adventists that we're going to look at. And I won't take the time to go through it, but you can see that we made a lot of adjustments. The analysis using a Cox proportional hazard enables us to make mortality comparisons at different ages. And of course, life expectancy is the sum of effects of all the forces of mortality at these different ages across the lifespan. So first of all, just looking at vegetarians and non-vegetarians in a fairly simple way. We found that the effect of vegetarianism, adjusting for all these things, seemed to be a little different at these different ages. We had about 11% advantage per year of age. That's how you interpret these at the younger ages of death, but that had essentially disappeared at the very old ages. So about 11% fewer deaths per year of age in the 60s, but that had largely disappeared by the age of 85. And this is, I think, a very interesting slide. So again, all these different causes of death. Whoops, no, how do I go back?
Just roll it back.
Scroll back.
It will appear previous, click the right. No,
Previous.
previous, yeah, second.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, different causes of death here, and this is on the death certificate where it can be actually the underlying cause or a contributing cause, split to these different kinds of vegetarians, always compared to the non-vegetarians, which is the line down here. So you can see at the younger ages of dying that for renal failure, infectious disease, diabetes, heart disease, the vegetarians are doing distinctly better than the non-vegetarians. All of these are Adventists. And remember, these non-vegetarians are relatively health conscious. And, not so much that we're seeing down here. Maybe some interesting stuff in a strange direction for dementia. But look what we see at age 85. Things are not quite so dramatic, but for renal failure, for heart disease, for diabetes, we see still that even at these very old ages, the vegetarians are doing better. But look what we see up here for diseases of the brain and nervous system. Things look different. And we right now are trying to understand this. And I'm not going to say terribly much more than that, but it's very interesting to us. And we have some hypotheses and we're doing some work. But it makes the point that maybe things are different according to age. So I just showed this very quickly. One of the things that is of interest to us is, of course, omega-3 fatty acids, and perhaps particularly the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. And we published looking at mortality from stroke. And just very quickly, it seems to show that the intake of omega-3 fatty acids, adjusting for all these other things, is associated with a lower risk of stroke mortality. And it's also true that if we looked at the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, we see more omega-6 may be adverse. Just very quickly to say that we were able to look at 930 plasma metabolites, comparing vegans to non-vegans and taking care of false discovery, and found that more than 500 of these were significant. And particularly metabolites that are related to lipids, amino acids, and xenobiotics. So just a conclusion, I think we can show, and like I said, we've published a couple of hundred different papers, so I've just shown you very briefly, skimming the surface as it were, that nutrition and lifestyle do affect life expectancy and diseases of aging risk in major ways. Not only diet patterns, the vegans and the lactose and so forth, but also certain specific foods. And I focused really just on nuts and dairy, and I could have done red meat, but there's probably a number of others that we don't yet understand. We think that we have good evidence with the slide I've just showed you, that the fluids bathing the cells of vegans with all these metabolites are substantially different to those bathing the cells of non-vegetarians. So nutrition is complicated, and there are age-related transitions in metabolism. We know that the skin doesn't convert to vitamin D in the same ways as you get older. You don't absorb vitamin B12 so well as you get older. Maybe the conversion from medium-chain omega-3 to long-chain omega-3, if you're not eating any, is not so good when you get older. And it seems that not only are these age-related transitions happening in metabolism, but they are reflected also probably in some of the nutrition disease associations are age-dependent. what we show in summary is that the Adventist lifestyle and being a vegetarian is largely avoiding many, many premature deaths. So it's delivering a lot more people up into their 80s. But at that point, it seems like there's a balance that happens. That overall the advantage disappears because although the advantages in vascular disease and renal failure and diabetes continue, they are counterbalanced by something that's going on that is somewhat adverse in terms of some of the neurological disorders. What it is that's going on, we speculate about B12, about DHA, that's long chain omega-3, perhaps medium chain omega-3, choline, which is important in the brain and vegetarians have less of, and possibly many other things. So thank you. That was all I have to say. Grace.
Fraser, thank you
Yes.
a lot.
Let me just say that we have an extra speaker here that are on the agenda for the next half hour.
I think they wanted to have a speaker and then Grace.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Maybe
For
so.
our next half hour, we have Dr. Everton.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Let me introduce him. We're welcome to you, Dr. Everton Padilla Gomez. He's a PhD in cardiology and professor in the professional master program in health promotion at the University, Adventist University Center, UNASP. Today, he will discuss assessing health in elderly population in developing countries and sharing insights from the Advento study. Please, Dr. Gomez, let's go.
So Dr. Lee has to leave and Dr. Boyd has to leave at 12, like 10 to 12.
Yeah. So somehow agendas become confused.
Huh. That's been happening.
Yeah.
Federico,
Yes?
we have a conflict of agenda here because Dr. Lee is supposed to be addressing and they have a limitation of time, just for you to know.
Okay.
I cannot hear
Dr.
him.
Gomez, we can't listen to you.
Can't hear you. Can't tell why.
Do you want to exchange my time with his time and then I present next after
May
him?
we?
Oh, for sure. It's a pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
with
Thank you.
so distinct colleagues.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Dr. Gomez.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you.
So should you introduce Dr. Lee?
So this is my dear colleague, Dr. Grace Lee. She is a neuropsychologist in the Department of Psychology and the School of Behavioral Health at Loma Linda University. She is a tenured professor here at Loma Linda. And she has been doing a sub-study on cognitive aging that I think will very much inform our thinking, in addition to the work on nutrition and all of the work on functionality that you have done. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Lee. And her work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, my name is Grace Lee, and as Dr. Morton mentioned, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist. And my focus is on aging and age-related cognitive disorders, like Alzheimer's disease, vascular, dementia, and other neurodegenerative diseases. A lot of my research, since coming to Loma Linda, has been around kind of diet and cognitive aging. And that line of research really began with the Adventist health study, the AHS2. And so I was approached initially by Nicole Gatto, who is an epidemiologist. She was a professor here in the School of Public Health at the time, and approached me about applying for a small pilot grant to investigate the relationship between dietary patterns and cognitive function in the elderly individuals who were part of the HS2 cohort. And so we worked together and were able to receive this grant. And so in 2016, we identified about 2,600 members of the original HS2 cohort who were now 60 and above and living within 75 miles of Loma Linda, so that they could come in and get the cognitive evaluation in person. And so this was about, I think about a decade after their initial enrollment in the AHS2. And so their average age at initial enrollment was around 60. And so now we figured they'd be on average 70, 72 years old. And so that would be around the time that we would start to expect to see a little bit of cognitive impairment in these folks. So we thought that the timing was perfect. And so initially we had 2,600 who met the criteria for age and kind of being nearby. We attempted to call 900 and only reached 200 of them, as a lot of phone numbers didn't work after a decade. A few had sadly passed, and a few had declined, but quite a few did agree to be part of the study. After kind of screening for inclusion-exclusion criteria, we eventually had oh, okay. Sorry.
Put them on the bottom.
Part.
Yeah, the top or bottom.
That's fine too. Okay, thank you. So our final cohort or sample for this pilot study was about 132 folks. Okay. And so dietary pattern was based on their initial responses to the FFQ, the food frequency questionnaire that was collected as part of the AHS2 study. And we, so that they were categorized the same way as Dr. Fraser described for the overall cohort. And so we had a few vegans, majority were lacto-ovo vegetarian, a few pesco and semi-vegetarians, and then quite a number of non-vegetarians. And so we also collapsed them into two groups, into vegetarian versus non-vegetarians. These were some of the measures that we collected. So we had a cognitive battery that was about 1.5 to 2 hours. So we had measures of gross cognitive functioning, MMSE MoCA. The AMNART is a measure to estimate premorbid verbal IQ, had a few measures of verbal memory, attention, processing speed, executive function, language. And then in addition to kind of your standard paper and pencil tests that have been well validated, we also administered kind of an experimental computerized battery, which has kind of become more popular in recent years as being, providing some more precise measurements of reaction time. And so, so we did that as well. Some other measures were measures of mood, the depression scale, the functional activities questionnaire, which gets at their dependence in those activities of daily living that are so important, height, weight, blood pressure. We did do blood draws for the majority of the sample for genetic testing. We wanted to look at the ApoE genotype, which is, as you all know, is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And also the geneticist that we were working with here on campus, Charles Wang, he wanted to do some microRNA sequencing as well to look at some of the relationships there. We collected some physical performance measures, the PPT and the timed up and go test, which I noticed was a part of Dr. Ramos's study as well. Self-reported physical activity, as well as historic dietary habits survey. And that was used to calculate a diet stability score. So the participants reported and how much the frequency of intake of, meat, fish, dairy, across each decade from the age of 10. And so we were able to use that data to calculate a score of how stable their diet had been over the lifespan. So this was, these are the characteristics of our sample. So we had 72 vegetarians and 60 non-vegetarians. On average, they were about 75 years old. The vegetarians were slightly older than the non-vegetarians in our sample. They were mostly white and highly educated. Again, the vegetarians were on average had 1 additional year of education. So that would represent 17 years would represent 1 year of graduate school beyond college. And the non-vegetarians were on average had bachelor's degrees. Had very high scores on the MMSC 29, which I think was similar to the Dr. Ramos's cohort, very high functioning, cognitively intact. Which is part of the inclusion criteria was that they did have to be cognitively intact and not have been diagnosed with a cognitive disorder. The MoCA, which is a little bit more difficult than the MMSC, was a few points lower, but still within the normal range. GDS scores, the depression scores were within the non-clinical range. So, scores between 0 and 9 would be considered non-clinical. And so the majority of our sample, I think only 3 people were scored above a 9 in our sample. The AMNART IQ, so this is our estimate of their premorbid verbal IQ, was quite high at 118 for both groups. And so it's a very cognitively high functioning group. And we also looked at mild memory impairment, which we defined as having at least 1 score of the 4 memory scores that we collected. If at least one of them was 1.5 standard deviations below the mean for their age, we said that they had mild memory impairment. So that's kind of the 1.5 standard deviations is the criteria that's typically used in clinical settings to diagnose mild cognitive impairment. But you would usually, want to see more than a single score to diagnose MCI. We had about 20% of our overall sample who had at least 1 in that impaired range, but the majority of those, over half of them, only had 1 out of the 4, and so very few had more than 1 impaired score on the memory tests. We also looked at, so in terms of BMI, the non-vegetarians on average did tend to have more people in the overweight and obese range, which you might expect. And then in terms of genotype, the E4 allele is the risk gene for Alzheimer's disease. And so it wasn't a significant difference, but you did see a slightly higher percentage of vegetarians who had the E4 genotype, that risk gene for Alzheimer's disease. In terms of the cognitive outcomes, as you saw, we had quite a number of different tests, and each of those tests has multiple scores. And so in order to reduce the number of outcomes, we performed a principal components analysis and ended up with 3 factors that those scores loaded onto. And so we had a processing speed factor, executive function, memory and language. And so those were our 3 outcome measures in terms of what to compare the vegetarians and non-vegetarians on. So in terms of our findings, we didn't find any significant differences between vegetarians and non-vegetarians on either processing speed, executive function, or memory and language. I will say though, if you kind of look at the mean scores on the individual tests, they were kind of trending in the direction where, vegetarians on average had slightly lower scores than the non-vegetarians. So that's kind of consistent with what Dr. Fraser was showing in terms of the incidence of dementia, especially at the older ages. So yeah, that's consistent there. And again, not sure kind of what's going on. But the diet pattern wasn't associated with odds of having mild memory impairment in at least one of the memory scores. When we looked at the diet stability score, vegetarians did have a higher diet stability score than non-vegetarians, so they were showing more stable dietary patterns, specifically over the last 3 decades of life from the time of the study. And independently, a higher diet stability score was associated with better scores on memory and language. And so even though vegetarians didn't necessarily have higher scores on memory than non-vegetarians, there was something about having a stable diet that was associated with better cognitive scores. Whether that's associated with some other kind of external factor, like, more stable income, stable, mood, medical care, access to more medical care is, we haven't explored all of those factors yet, but we thought that was an interesting finding. And then in a second paper, we also looked at associations between physical performance and cognitive scores, and we found that performance on the PPT and TUG tests were significantly associated with cognitive processing speed scores. But self-reported physical activity was not. So that was not quite as strong a predictor as actual physical performance on these objective measures. And we found that those associations were stronger among vegetarians in the sample. So this is kind of like our phase 1 of the pilot study. And then we also wanted to look at some brain biomarkers on neuroimaging studies. And so we were able to get a second pilot grant to invite some of the participants in our phase 1 for a follow-up cognitive evaluation, so we could get some longitudinal data on average about 1.5 years following their initial evaluation. And also to get brain MRI so that we could look at different measures of brain structure in terms of particularly blood-brain barrier integrity, as well as different measures of brain volume. And then this time we were specifically interested in omega-3 levels and associations between omega-3, blood-brain barrier integrity, and cognition. And so of the 130 in our original sample, we were able to get 45 to come back for a second cognitive evaluation. And 40 of those also completed a brain MRI. A few of those 45 couldn't do the brain MRI for various reasons. So one had metal in their body, a couple had claustrophobia, someone couldn't lie flat on their back on the scanner, and so there were a few who couldn't complete the MRI. So we also got dried blood spot samples so that we could analyze for omega-3 and omega-6 composition. And so we were given numerous, so omega quant, so we shipped those samples out to omega quant for analysis and got a number of different measurements. But the main ones that we were interested in were the omega-3 index, which was a combination of DHA and EPA, and the omega-6 index, which was really just AA. And then for the MRI, we collected the MRI scans here at East Campus on the 3-Tech scanner. We've got a number of different sequences, but the ones I'll report on today are the 3D T1 weighted MP range, which gives us kind of structural segmentation and volumetric analyses. And then the dynamic contrast enhanced MR sequence, which gives us a measure of blood-brain barrier integrity. We have a few other sequences that we still need to look at in terms of diffusion tensor imaging to look at white matter structural integrity, SWY, which provides a measure of iron in the brain, and then FLAIR, which provides measures of white matter lesions in the brain. So in terms of our, our published findings, so the first paper was looking at K-trans, which was a measure of blood-brain barrier integrity. And we looked specifically at blood-brain barrier integrity in a few specific regions and correlated those with the long-chain omega-3 measures and the omega-6 score. And found that omega-3 was significantly correlated with blood-brain barrier in the internal capsule, which is part of the corticospinal tract. And so there's some motor pathways that go through the internal capsule. And so for the blood-brain barrier measure K-trans, actually a lower score reflects higher blood-brain barrier integrity. And so we see that higher or better blood-brain barrier integrity is associated with a higher long-chain omega-3 score. Then we also, in a second paper, we also looked at brain volume and cortical thickness in various regions. And in this paper, we specifically focused on omega-3 and EPA and DHA, the individual scores there. And so we found that the omega-3 index was positively correlated with the volume in the entorhinal cortex and as well as total white matter volume. And so the entorhinal cortex is that region that surrounds the hippocampus. It's involved in new learning and consolidation of new memories. And then total white matter volume is probably, you know, that's one of the markers of aging. So we see kind of as we age, kind of deterioration of the white matter, deterioration of the myelin integrity in the white matter, and that's associated with aging and slowing of processing speed in particular. And so we saw that, so that was correlated with these omega-3 measures as well. In terms of the cognitive outcomes, the omega-3 values were also correlated with delayed memory. So this is delayed recall of a word list 30 minutes after initial exposure to that word list. And so having higher concentrations of these omega-3 fatty acids in the blood was associated with better performance on verbal memory measures, as well as through color, which is a measure of visual and verbal processing speed. And so we saw some positive correlations there as well. So those were some of our published findings. We still have some other kind of ongoing projects using the variables that we collected. My lab is especially interested in the effects of depression on cognitive function and some of the potential interactions between depression and APOE genotype. So is that relationship between depression and cognition stronger in E4 carriers versus non-carriers? Looking at interactions between physical activity, BMI, and sex on cognition, particularly in light of the obesity paradox, where we see that in older adults having a higher BMI may actually be protective, neuroprotective. And then also, since I mentioned earlier, we did administer computerized battery. And so kind of comparing sensitivity of our kind of more standard paper and pencil measures with the computerized tests, and see if these newer computerized tests may be more sensitive at detecting associations with nutrition, dietary factors, and lifestyle variables. So that's the AHS2 sub-study that I've been working on with Dr. Gatto, as well as other AHS2 investigators. But some of the other kind of diet-related research that has been going on here at Loma Linda, I've collaborated quite a bit with the Center for Nutrition, Healthy Lifestyle and Disease Prevention, with Dr. Sabate and Dr. Rajaram, who have been just really great collaborators, and they are the experts in nutrition. And so we've worked on a number of different trials looking at specific foods, specific plant-based foods. And so these are intervention trials, randomized control trials where groups are randomized either to a control diet or an intervention consisting of one of these foods. So the two that I can just kind of briefly go over these, the walnut and healthy aging study, which was actually a two-center study with here at Loma Linda and also a hospital in Barcelona, Spain. And this was a 2-year intervention in cognitively healthy older adults. And so there were over 300 older adults recruited from Loma Linda, over 300 from Barcelona. And they were randomized to either a diet that was enriched with walnuts or a control diet where they were instructed to abstain from walnuts. And so they completed cognitive evaluation at baseline, and 2 years later, these are some of the baseline characteristics of the groups. On average, they were about 70 years old in both groups. Most did not smoke, but there were a few who had been formerly smokers. And just kind of for the sake of time, this was the cognitive battery. So again, a pretty extensive cognitive battery spanning multiple different domains. And interestingly, we actually here at Loma Linda in our sample, we didn't find any effect of the walnut intervention on any of the cognitive domains. But the Barcelona cohort actually did show some signal of an effect. So the walnut diet did show a slight improvement in their global cognition score after the 2-year intervention. And in particular, it was really the visual perceptual score that seemed to improve. And so this effect was specific to the participants in Spain. So I think there are likely other factors related to the lifestyle of those individuals, lifestyle factors, I'm sure, other kind of dietary factors that needed to be taken into account. Another trial that we recently finished was the habitual diet and avocado trial. This one again was a multi-center study. But this one examined the effects of daily avocado consumption for 6 months. The main outcome was actually on visceral adiposity, so kind of that abdominal fat in overweight and obese adults. But here at Loma Linda, we applied to do kind of an ancillary study looking at cognitive outcomes in particular. And so the cognitive portion was just done here at Loma Linda and not at the other 3 sites. And so here we had 250 adults who were randomized to either the avocado group or the control diet. And they were, this was a younger cohort. So this, the age of this cohort ranged from 25 all the way to 84, I believe. And so the average age was about 50 in both groups. Not quite as educated as the AHS2 sample. And we did recruit specifically for people who had a high waist circumference, since we were looking at that abdominal fat as one of the outcome measures. And so this cohort is quite different from the AHS2 cohort in kind of some of those areas. Again, we had I think it was again about a 1.5 hour battery that spanned various domains. But again, unfortunately, we didn't see any effect of the intervention in those 6 months, and so they didn't have any improvement over the control group in any of our measures. Both groups did show improvement from baseline to 6 months, but likely a practice effect of kind of the multiple exposures to those tests. We have some other studies that we're still kind of finalizing the results on in terms of soy and peanuts. And then also with Dr. Morton here, which I'm sure she'll talk about tomorrow, we were able to look at eggs in that cohort and the effect of eggs and found that that was associated with improved memory in her sample. But yeah, I'll leave that to her to talk about tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Alessandra, you want to talk something? Okay,
No.
you raised your hand. Okay,
Let's move to the last presentation.
so let's go to our presentation. Finally, we welcome Dr. Everton Padilla Gomez. He's a PhD in cardiology and a professor in he's a professor in professional master program in health promotion at the Adventist University Center here in São Paulo. Dr. Gomes told me he is also a collaborating professor at Faculty of Medicine at the University of São Paulo. And today we will discuss assessing health in elderly population in developing countries and share insights from Advento studies. Now, please, Dr. Gomes, let's listen to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation for this reunion. I'm very pleased to be among very distinctive colleagues, and especially I would tell that Dr. Fraser was an inspiration for everything that was done here in Brazil about Advento study. Also, all the colleagues and the study group in Loma Linda. He explained much of the characteristics of the Adventist population and the health standards that we surely know from AHS and AHS2. Then I won't get you with so many justifications, and we can go directly to other things pertaining to our presentation. When we see the diet classification according to animal protein consumption, we see something that goes from strictly vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian to some subkinds of omnivorous diets, semi-vegetarian, pesco-vegetarian, no vegetarian. And we have many classifications that are used. We have some importance on this to use the classification of Loma Linda University studies, because we have studied and we are still studying Seventh-day Adventist population in Brazil. And what's the thing that we can tell you from all these studies? There is a global trending looking at use of foods, and especially to consumption of meat and red meat and processed meat. And there is a very strong correlation between the consumption of these foods and cardiovascular disease. And we have many experiences from Loma Linda, from Epic Oxford, and from elsewhere in the world. And the trend always go in using less meat and more fruits and vegetables. It would be better. Being vegetarian is better for your health. And in this topic, we surely have something to study about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They are the 22nd largest organized religion worldwide. They have health studies since the 1950s. They have more than 300 articles, Brazil has nowadays this large number of followers, and Greater São Paulo has more than 120,000 members. And the Adventist philosophy is something that I will just briefly tell you. Uh, it's it has been studied in many ways, and one of those ways is to see in the topics. Healthcare is a religious task. The cause of many diseases is violation of health laws. Seek balance in diet, work, and personal relationships. Encouraging vegetarianism, control of appetite and deleterious mental stimuli, search for natural resources, personal hygiene, environmental issues, and health education. And there is a quotation from one of the leaders in the beginning of the church that said, pure air, sunlight, abstinence, rest, exercise, proper diet, use of water, and reliance on divine powers. These are the true remedies. But anyway.
Dr. Gomes,
Oh, excuse me.
I beg your pardon. I guess you have slides. Would you like to share to us?
Oh, I may share, but I will take some time to. Oh, excuse me. I made a terrible mistake that I have made before. I was aware before, and I'm not aware right now. I didn't
Here
share
we are.
this.
Oh, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
I was looking at my presentation. Oh, what a sin. I was looking at my presentation. I thought that I was sharing with you, and you were tortured by my poor pronunciation in English in this moment, trying to understand what he's talking about. Then I will. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Now we
Thank
can
you
see
very
that.
much. Thank you very much. Uh, but in public health, we don't want everyone to be a Seventh-day Adventist. We want to explore the health benefits that looking at the Seventh-day Adventists could bring to the whole society. And this is what we have some interest in making epidemiological studies with Seventh-day Adventists. First of all, they are interested in health as a theological point and from the perspective of social coexistence. There are few subgroups in society that come closer to being uniformly exposed to the same variables with a similar diet. The relative absence of smoking and alcohol consumption allows the examination of effect of other exposures, such as diet, with a lower rate of confounding factors. The church structure with a unified secretariat system facilitates tracking and reduces the loss of subjects during follow-up, and the market tendency towards vegetarianism making this population probably the closest of any subgroup of lifestyle recommended by health associations for the prevention of atherosclerosis. It's not my quotation. It was from Spiller in Handbook of Lipids in Human Nutrition. And I won't take you apart from what Dr. Fraser already had told you. AHS has shown many benefits in vegetarianism, in active exercise, nut consumption, and keeping the BMI within the recommended range, and never smoking. But not everything is defined. As you may see, we are in a different set in Brazil. We have different standards of social relations, economic patterns, and racial patterns. Here is a photo from a couple marrying in Loma Linda in advanced age, and here's how the Brazilians elderly are, and we have some other questions of reproducibility because we are a multi-ethnical country. So United States, someone can tell, oh, United States also is a multi-ethnical country, but we have a lot of mixing And it's very important to understand the relations and the influence of these patterns in the health. Apart of this, we have also, when we go to a small setting of studies in a small in countries that don't have much funding to do, we must use some substitute endpoints. And one of those that we were looking at, it's the study from coronary artery calcium score. You see here is a very known study from MESA, and the relation between good health habits and mortality. And other things is the change, putting in a way for our colleagues that are not in the medical field. When you have determination of coronary calcium score in a population, there is a marked relationship between the amount of calcium in the coronaries and the cumulative incidence of coronary artery disease and even survival rate. In Adventist study, we have done many things here. I will pass by rapidly these slides, but just you to know, in the physiopathology of the coronary artery disease, we have a formation of a calcium layer, and this calcium layer may be quantified, and there is a good relation between this calcium score and the occurrence of events in a patient. And these standards, I have already told about this. And Adventist study was a study that made the following: analyze the reproducibility of factors previously studied as protective against subclinical atherosclerosis in a vegetarian population, ethnically different from that analyzed in previous studies, for factors indicative of a subclinical form of coronary artery disease. And we have subdivided the groups between omnivorous, ovo-lacto-vegetarian, strict vegetarians. And we have made a correlation of groups diet with cardiometabolic markers, and make a correlation of other factors already known to disease prevention collected in biopsychosocial questionnaire with the cardiometabolic markers and anthropometric results obtained. The setting, the place of the study was in the University Hospital of São Paulo University. It was made in the same fashion of ELSA Brazil. That's a big study that has included more than 15,000 subjects from 10 universities in many parts of Brazil. And the São Paulo site was in the University of São Paulo University Hospital. It's for someone that isn't acquainted with the situation, reality in São Paulo. We have a university hospital that's a smaller hospital, and we have the Hospital das Clínicas, the clinics hospital. This structure here. We have made this study possible with the Laboratory of Genetics and Molecular Cardiology. Also, we had some help from the UNASP, Hospital Adventista de São Paulo. Hospital Adventista de São Paulo graciously have given the diet for the patient that was in the study. UNASP has provided even some grant for some students to help on the study. We had many professors in in UNASP that have joined to make studies, and many and some masters and some PhDs were done with the material that we have collected in the Advento study. And I will put forward with this, but just you know, the patient when was pre-selected and was invited to the study, he was invited to go to the hospital. He had a desk sample collection, uh, anthropometric measures, measures of blood pressure, collection of blood, complementary exams, interview, ultrasonography, and CT scan with calcium score. The patient took almost 11 hours of exposure there to finish the main part of the study. There were also a AMBP monitoring and other things here. And we had used the ELSA protocol that's available and elsewhere scientifically. And we had made anthropometric blood pressure and bioimpedance and interview of social work, psychological, general health factors, and food frequency questionnaire. Uh, we had a lot of laboratory tests, additional exams. I would like to highlight the presence here of Dr. Naomi Vital, that was one of our colleagues that had seen the part of cognition, and she's presently, she began with Advento study, and now she's she was invited to the ELSA study, and she has very good data and many studies pertaining the relation of diet, ultra-processed foods, and cognition in the main group, the non-Adventist group. And let me go here. I will do the following. I will show you first the general data, and I will take some highlights from the elderly population. We had patients going from 35 years old to 74 years old. The main group was from 45 to 55 years old. The mean age in the group was 52 years old for all the diets. And I would like to show you this. We had also a socioeconomic data, and many of the patients, almost 60% of the patients have a household income less than $1,000 monthly. And this is important for some of the things that we have seen. Also, we must tell that we have a bias in the study, but it's a bias of, this is not a demographic study. It's a study that has been made an invitation. And as it happened with ELSA study also, we have a trending toward most of people were in superior formation. They have gone to universities, and it always it also show us that someone would ask, well, you have someone that is very well informed, maybe it should have an effect on the outcome of the patient. But we had this difference, but inside we had a very little difference between strict vegetarians and lacto-ovo vegetarians and omnivorous pertaining the superior formation. But this is something else that we have put in the final model, trying to limit the bias inside the study. And what we have seen in our study, between in the baseline characteristics, the use of vegetables in men and women, we had a population, we are talking here about Seventh-day Adventists, almost 70% they use vegetables less than 5 times a week. And use of fruits less than 5 times a week, also in around 9.3%. And the level of physical activity during leisure time, we had a very, comparatively to the Brazilian population, we had a more active group than what was shown on ELSA study. We had about 61% of people declaring that they are active during leisure time. In ELSA study, I don't have this data here. We must have some authorization to show their data also. It was about 52%, and it was significant. Obesity, it was around 18%, overweight about 35%, hypertension 25%, and pre-hypertension 29.6%. And I will go, we have other characteristics here of previous hypertension, and I would like to show you this data here. We have in Brazil a study that is done periodically called Vigitel. That's a telephone inquiry, and we had a correlation, and we compared to ELSA Brazil that has the same methodology of Adventist study. And what we have seen, the number of people, doesn't matter if omnivorous or ovo-lacto-vegetarians or strict vegetarians, in Adventist study, that it have eaten less than 5 servings of fruits a week were 11%. The number of people that use less than 5 servings of fruit per week in ELSA and Vigitel almost triple. Also, we have the same trending towards vegetables, and we have the low level of leisure time physical activity was better in the Adventist study than ELSA Brazil and Vigitel. It's something for discussion later, but inside the groups, the trending was almost the same. I will show you some data about this. We are going forward with the time. Time is implacable. And what have we seen? Strict vegetarians, ovo-lacto-vegetarians, and omnivores, they have a difference in the metabolic outcome. That was something that Professor Fraser have told the bath around the cells of vegetarians, and as long as I understood his ending remarks. In weight, height is not significant. It would be very good if we find some formula to eat something and be bigger and be higher, but it's not the thing here. It's just to show the coherence inside the study. BMI, blood pressure, heart rate was different between the studies according to meat exposure or consumption. And we have also the same results in bioimpedance, in weight, skeletal muscle mass, fat mass, active body water, everything showing a patient that has a trending on having less metabolic disease. And I think that right now it's very small for you here, but we had some differences here in urinary sodium, serum creatinine, and total cholesterol. It was very marked between the groups, ranging from total cholesterol of 167 going to 177 to 189 in the non-vegetarian group. Triglycerides, it had also a difference. ADL, ADL was not significant in our groups between vegetarians and non-vegetarians. Castelli index, HOMA was different. And we had also some things to think about when we talk about vegetarians. We had a difference in hemoglobin. It was lesser in strict vegetarians, also as hematocrit compared to omnivores. And the ultra-sensitive C-reactive protein was smaller in strict vegetarians than omnivores, but it was not. It was higher than lacto-vegetarians. I think that we had some differences intra-group, and but the trending between omnivores and lacto-vegetarians was very marked. Phosphorus, serum phosphorus had that didn't have any difference here, and we had also seen the groups on pesco-vegetarians and semi-vegetarians, and we have a lot here, but it would be subject for other day because we would like to rush to the elderly group here. And anyway, the laboratory data in perspective shows something that I will show here, but for elderly population, I have to make a disclaimer here. It's worth to note that in most developed countries and many health-related contexts, elderly refers to individuals ages 65 or older, and also is the definition from World Health Organization. However, in some developing countries or in specific research contexts, the definition may start at 60 years or older, especially when assessing age-related factors in those populations. Brazilian law stands the threshold for elderly as 60 years old. And it's something that we must discuss also because there are some benefits, there are some social benefits that the elderly population here in Brazil should have. And then we have the capability to make even the determination for elderly in 65 or in 60 years old.
Right. Discussion because the seminar doesn't mean to have actually.
And I would like just to show you, time is running, we have just 3 minutes here. The data profile on subjects more than 6 years old, we have 341 subjects in this matter. We have a similar trend in the overall study. The household monthly income is that almost 6% of elderly subjects also live in households with a monthly income of less than $1,000. It was not. It was something that it struck us as something that people always say. You have to be wealthy to receive well to be a vegetarian, and we have seen in many cases in a group of people that were in the middle down class that were vegetarian, strict vegetarian, and were able to keep with this diet. And it's an important insight when we talk about developing countries. Here's something just about the color and race. We have people that define themselves as black, white, but here is the other thing that's a little bit different in Brazil. We have brown. that it's like it's called pardos. It's they are mixed people, and miscegenation here in Brazil is almost 60%. Then, therefore, we must pay attention to how the health, cardiovascular health, will behave in these conditions. Nevertheless, anthropometric and blood pressure variables for elderly population, and I tried to be very restricted in some elderly in going forward with elderly because we are talking about subgroups. But weight, BMI, blood pressure was also different between strict vegetarians, ovo-lacto vegetarians, and omnivores. But you have to note that the trend, and I don't have this slide right here, the mean of blood pressure between these diet groups in elderly and in younger people was different. But even so, diet was capable in this study group to preserve the subjects in some way if we see by the statistical analysis. Also, I would like to talk to you about EPAC. EPAC is a type of evaluation of physical activity, as you may know. And the walk days and the time of exercise and leisure activity adjusted for the three groups in elderly was identical. Only the leisure activity adjusted was bigger, but in the omnivore group. But I have to tell you, it's a subgroup analysis and must be seen with caution. This is the clinical data according to diet pattern. It's just more a visual aid to see between omnivores that are in yellow, the ovo-lacto vegetarians and the strict vegetarians around the difference and what all those variables that I show you here, they were different between those groups. And finally, the imaging exams, we have made liver board assessment, carotid intima thickness, anterior length, carotid femoral time, and pulse wave velocity. And we have seen only the carotid femoral time was not significant, but the other variables were significant between the groups going in the trending, protecting vegetarians. And finally, coronary calcium analysis. It was something very difficult for someone that, for our colleagues that are used to make statistical analysis. When you have a group that have many zeros, you must develop a model to see what's happening here. Otherwise, you will don't see any difference. The zeros prevent from us to have very good difference. And we have, I won't go away further with this, but just to show you, we had a continuous model of a coronary calcium score going numerically higher and a discrete part of the model. And we have seen differences between ovo-lacto vegetarian diet, strict vegetarian diet, gender, male sex, and age at the age of inclusion. And in the discrete part of the model, male sex, age at the date of inclusion, body mass index, and total serum cholesterol. We were very happy that the correlation between calcium score and our findings was very consistent with literature, and but around subgroup analysis in the elderly group, we must have cautious interpretation. Subgroup analysis data must be interpreted cautiously. Potential difficulty in extrapolating findings to a broader population or situations, but it's a very good hypothesis generator. Subgroup analyses are variable for proposing new hypotheses and can guide future analysis and complementary studies. And this, in the context of this study, it's not a demographic analysis of a specific region. The focus is on factors associated with the individuals who participated in the study. And we had a backlog because of the pandemics. We are now calling back all the patients to make a second wave of exams. And we want to thank you everyone for the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gomes, for this presentation. Another very interesting study. Well, after all these insightful presentations, we would like to open the floor for discussion, but we are on time. In California, they still have to have lunch, probably starving. And
they had lunch.
We have already had lunch.
I didn't have, but anyway, that's.
Oh, excuse me, Dr. Gomes. Oh, and thank you very much for all. I don't know if I would like to call Dr. Kelly Morton, please, for our final prayer. Is it possible?
Go ahead, go ahead.
So you don't want to have any discussion?
Well, we can have 15 minutes, huh?
You want to have 15
15?
minutes?
Yeah,
Oh,
we have
okay.
to finish at 5 o'clock there, 1 o'clock here.
Okay, better.
You want lunch, faculty dining room?
Yeah, he went there.
Oh, you went there, okay.
That's okay. Alessandra, do we have questions?
We have 3 questions in the chat, Fred. Do you like read for him?
Look for them. Okay. First of all, Sujata Hajaram. Quick question. In the cohort, he showed normal dementia and middle category that is borderline. Are these individuals with mild cognitive impairment? How was the assessment made? Just MMSE or other cognitive tests?
I think it's Dr. Ramos. You called them borderline, Dr. Ramos.
Yeah.
No.
I assume it's MCI, but how did you assess borderline cognitive impairment?
Yeah, we used that instrument, the clinical dementia rating, which is an interview done with the carer or the spouse of the elderly, and trying to see how this person evaluates the development of the skills of the person. So it's not a battery of tests, it's just the report of people who knows the person enough to say that they have worsened or not worsened the performance in 6 dimensions basic. I won't go through that, but you basically can say that a 0 score means no decline, 0.5 score means borderline decline, and 1, 2, 3 means already a dementia-like decline. So they can be light dementia, moderate dementia, or severe dementia, 1, 2, 3. So it's a score that goes 0, 0.5, 1, 2, 3. So the borderline are the 0.5, and is that the group that we assume are not normal anymore, but are not demented yet.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you want to intervene.
Yeah, and that's what the target population for intervention to stimulate cognition,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Another question is, again, Professor Ramos, from Gina Abdallah. I would like to know how the pandemic of COVID-19 impacted in the mental health of elderly and the Epidoso study as a whole.
Well, this is gonna be a subject for a talk here tomorrow, but it would be transmitted to Brazil. But I can say that there was a big impact, you know. We took people from our cohort that, you know, had normal prevalence of depression and anxiety. And when we interviewed them in end of 2023 and 2024, which is after the pandemic, they were very compromised in terms of anxiety and depression. Rates went sky up. And this is something that we have to face because in general terms, the pandemic is supposed to be followed. The pandemic of COVID is probably being followed by a pandemic of mental disturbance, you know. And this is something for the psychiatrists to be, in Brazil, they are very aware of that. And we are, as we perceive this deterioration of mental health, we offer psychological support for those who participated in this small survey that we did after the pandemic.
And we see the same thing here.
And apparently the same is happening here in the States, and I think elsewhere, you know, the pandemic with all the measures of containment, like, you know, social isolation, lockdowns and things like that, definitely affected people's mental health.
Yeah, same.
Sure.
Same.
Oh, thank you. The last question is to Dr. Fraser. Dr. Fraser, how have you assessed dementia diagnosis in the HSS2? Our groups, this question is from Naomi Vital Ferreira. Our group has observed an important association of higher ultra-processed foods consumption with cognitive decline over 8 years of follow-up in Elsa Brazil study.
Yes, well, thank you, Naomi. That's a good question because HS2, the parent study, so to speak, was not really designed to look at dementia. It was primarily designed to look at cancer and longevity, maybe cardiovascular disease. So we had to take measures that we had available. The paper that we've just published and which I showed you, the way we diagnosed dementia was simply whether it was listed as the underlying cause of death on the death certificate or whether it was a contributing cause of death on the death certificate. So, you know, we understand that that is not a very strict criterion. Thousands of doctors are filling these death certificates in ways that they will have their own criteria. We now are just starting some analyses looking at Medicare data where, again, the criteria will be stricter because it is medical doctors' diagnoses and it will be incidence of dementia rather than just associated with death from dementia. So it will be different in that way, but still perhaps less than ideal, but it is the only practical way for us to do it, and it's probably fairly good in the sense that, you know, I'm a doctor myself and many of you are. We're usually quite slow to put a label of dementia on someone unless there is some cause for that.
Right.
Oh, thank you. We have no other questions. So, one message just arrived. Oh, we don't have more messages. So
And
I'd like to.
we have this forum tomorrow, Fred.
Yeah. We're gonna go ahead tomorrow. It will start at, I guess, 9 p.m. from California and 9 a.m. I'm sorry, from California and 1 p.m. here for Brazil. And so see you tomorrow. And I'd like now ask to Dr. Kelly Morton for the final prayer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So if we could bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing together this incredible symposium across Brazil, across Loma Linda University and the Blue Zone, across my many colleagues here on campus and my new possible colleagues in Brazil. We are thankful to learn about all that you have created and all that we can do with these creations to further our lives and the work that we can do for good to heal the world. Amen.
Amen. God bless us all. Thank you very much. And see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Finish. And close the one.
So we don't.
Lysandra, where are you? Monica, where are you? I can't listen to you.
Fred,
Yeah.
tudo bem? Ainda tá transmitindo lá no YouTube.
Yes. So you have to get it out. You have to tell to
Alessandra tá aí? Alessandra?
no, Lysandra, she is and not at the same time. I have to just stop the transmission to YouTube. And it was an amazing moment. What do you think, Professor Conti?
Ah, excellent.
Excellent. Thank you. It was very insightful. Don't you think?
Oh, Fred,
Yeah.
você matou.
We had 4 very interesting works. Very interesting works.
Sim. Fred, acho que ainda
Yeah.
tá passando ainda no YouTube. Tem que pedir pra Alessandra.
Alessandra.
Peraí. Mandar uma mensagem pro Cauã.
Yeah.
Só um minuto, Fred.
Yeah.